Welcome to Urban Legend Crypto. We're here to talk with Brett, Jenny, and myself about what's happening in the world. Brett, what you got to say?
I like your Raiders shirt, Pedro. They put it together this week once they got rid of their coach and their quarterback.
You know, that whole thing was absolutely ridiculous. I don't know why. I mean, I know why, but I don't know if I would have done what they did with the coach. What do you have to say about that?
It wasn't what he was doing. What wasn't working. I mean, it's the combination of everybody together, whether with the players, the management, the owners, whatever it is. It just wasn't working. You know, so to me, it's like, listen, you can keep going in that direction and drive yourself into the ground by the end of the year, which you already know where you're going. You're going into the ground, right? So why go into the ground super hard when you can just get a soft blow and give yourself time to rebound, look around you, and see what you need to do to make adjustments and kind of get going in the direction that you wanted to. So to me, the main thing was when the Raiders got Jimmy G as a quarterback, it baffled me how I'm watching the news and all the Raider fans here are like, oh man, we're set now that we got Jimmy G. Have you seen Jimmy G? He sucks. Like, no kidding. He wasn't going to be the Hall of Fame quarterback for you. No kidding, you weren't going to win games with Jimmy G. No kidding. So to me, I'm all for the new quarterback going in. Why not? I mean, Raiders might have a Brock Purdy on their hands from San Francisco. A guy drafted, no one's really heard of, puts in a few hours, and boom, turns out to be the next Tom Brady, right? Okay. Possibly.
The next Tom Brady, Brett. Well, listen, I'm all
That's
for
bold.
I'm all for a soft blow. Okay? Enough said.
All right.
So today we're going to talk about what, Brett? What's the first thing you
Well, let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin, man. We just got done watching a video on a guy who works for a nonprofit cryptocurrency themed, what was it? Advocacy group? I guess a cryptocurrency advocacy group. And he was giving a speech in front of Congress, and I think he gave what I feel is probably the best or some of the best reasons for the existence and the case for Bitcoin. You know, number one, he basically said that it lets you send and receive money with nothing more than a computer and the internet. Think about how revolutionary that is just with that thought alone. And the genius about the whole thing is that you're able to send money from party one to party two without the need for a middleman. Think about the freedom of with not having to rely on someone in the middle. The lack of any corporation in between means that Bitcoin is the world's first public digital payments infrastructure. And by public, I simply mean available to all. Bitcoin is merely the beginning of and he also said that Bitcoin is merely the beginning of a broader movement. You can address the private payment structure, then you can start to address the other. So if you can address the private payment structure, you can address many other choke points that we have. For example, the SWIFT payment system is the payment system that all the central banks use to basically transfer money back and forth across the world. There was a low-level bank employee from an Indian bank that stole $1.8 billion by simply manipulating the SWIFT message system. It's today considered the largest bank heist or the largest bank heist in the world, in the history of the world. So another thing that he talked about was what it does is free up an infrastructure payment system that is controlled by a few centralized figures. And the fact of being able to transfer value across the world with nothing more than a computer and the internet is mind-boggling. It's computer science to the greatest effect, you know? So let's think about right now, not only that SWIFT thing, but he talks about the only public payment infrastructure that we have right now is cash. The only public payments infrastructure that we have is cash, and it only works face to face. To me, it will be as significant for freedom, prosperity, and human flourishing as the birth of the internet. Take, for example, the Equifax breach, where there were millions of people's social security numbers that were hacked in. There were millions of people's social security numbers that were hacked into. Then there were also pacemakers at the St. Jude's Hospital that were hacked into. All this can happen because there's one single point of failure. When I speak to people about blockchain, I say that's the difference, is you don't have one central point of failure. So when you can hack into a pacemaker, you can hack into Equifax, you can hack into whatever systems that you want because they literally have one central point of failure. The point of public blockchain is that there's no one central point of failure. That's about all I have to say. I mean, there's other things, but I keep on going for it. Hey, man, like I said, I
love you, Brett.
I'm amazing at editing, brother. Like,
Yeah.
you know what's funny is I'll show my video to my wife at the end. She's like, wow. And I'll be like, you want to see the original? I'm like, I'm an artist. I'm not so much of a talker as I am. I'm just a good editor.
All right. So,
Yep.
So to explain Bitcoin in the simplest terms, the whole concept of Bitcoin is to eliminate all middlemen. That's banks, and get to a point where governments are gone and it's just two parties deciding to transact. Exchanges now that are middlemen, and those need to go. We need to figure out a way to make a peer-to-peer a little faster so it's used a little better. Now, there are a lot of wallets, there are a lot of companies that are pioneering that. But you know what? The best thing about Bitcoin, you want to know what that is? There's no single point of failure, Brett. You know what that means? It just means that you can't get hacked by just entering into one point. So, as you mentioned earlier, the SWIFT system got hacked by a small Indian bank that basically did a bank robbery. 1.8 billion was successfully taken out of the SWIFT system because there's a way in through their messaging system to approve transactions.
Manipulate their messages.
And manipulated the messages. So they took out 1.8 billion. What blows me out of the water is there's no accountability in that transaction. So they stole 1.8 billion. I mean, you go to a freaking 7-Eleven and you try to steal a stick of gum, man, you're going to get hit by cameras. The clerk's going to throw a taco at you. Something's going to happen. But yeah, you could take 1.8 billion out of an Indian bank and go unnoticed for a while, right? And that crime hasn't been solved. So Bitcoin wouldn't allow something like that to happen because there's so many verification platforms. And as soon as a fraudulent transaction comes up, it wouldn't be verified by all the other systems that are in play. So I believe that Bitcoin has a place.
So basically, Taiwan came out and said they want to use Bitcoin as their legal tender, which is a huge deal. And the only other country, I believe, right now is El Salvador, I believe. So this is what we're going to see. We're going to see more and more countries want to have Bitcoin become their legal tender. Why? Because it benefits them, right? They don't need to be reliant on any central bank or any central figure and that country's manipulation. They don't have to be subject to it at all. So Taiwan, right now, as we speak, is developing the framework for a new crypto regulatory framework as we speak. Taiwan has introduced groundbreaking bill for cryptocurrency. First, they want to come out with a bill that regulates crypto. then the regulation is going to deem necessary to address industry challenges and opportunities. So imagine that. First, we're going to come out with framework. We're going to come out with rules and regulations. And then we're going to be able to see the challenges and the opportunities that exist in the space right now as we speak. How will this help them? And how will this get rid of the bad ones? Key provisions of the bill means licensing and registration requirements for the crypto exchanges. We all want that. And they have an emphasis on AML and KYC compliance. If anybody wants to know what that is, KYC is know your customer, which basically means you have to submit all important and prevalent documents to prove you are who you are. Social Security, bank account, driver's license, passport, whatever it is, it shows you are who you are. They're going to require that. Just like any market, any exchange, or anything that you want to do legal, you have to have a framework and regulation, and that's part of what that provides. A focus on consumer protection and dispute resolution mechanisms. The designation of a regulatory authority for oversight and enforcement. So what's expected for the impact on Taiwan's crypto ecosystem? How's this going to benefit their ecosystem? Basically, it's going to enhance transparency and accountability in the market. It's going to have promotion of responsible innovation, safeguard of user interest and financial integration, and potential positioning of Taiwan as a global hub for crypto innovation, which is going to move them to the forefront and a lot of discussion for other countries in the world. Taiwan's proactive regulatory approach sets an example for other nations, and the conclusion is basically the highlights of Taiwan's commitment to embrace. This highlights Taiwan's commitment to embracing a digital future.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you want to provoke China into war, this is this is kind of
good point.
This is kind of one of the things you would want to avoid if you were from Taiwan. But anyway, the whole idea of getting rid of a Federal Reserve System, supplanting it by Bitcoin, is dangerous, to say the least. The World Bank isn't going to like that. Okay, so look what happened with El Salvador when Bitcoin took a massive dump. They had to go into the World Bank and get another loan, right? And they were like, well, you need more money, honey. You know, I like El Salvador's idea. I like Taiwan's idea. Okay, I'm not against it, but it's a very dangerous play to walk away from the Federal Reserve System as it is standing right now. And that's it. I mean, hey, Taiwan.
Let me say this real
I wish
quick.
you the best, my peoples. Good luck.
It is a dangerous play, though. If you want a way to provoke China into war, if you want a way to provoke the central banks, if you want a way to provoke the world and the systems that be right now, this would be a great way to go about that. Albert Pike. Albert Pike was a Confederate general and a prominent Freemason who died in 1891. He supposedly wrote a letter to an Italian politician and revolutionary in 1871 predicting 3 world wars. World War I will be the triumph over Christianity. World War II will basically be the triumph of a new society of socialism. And number 3, he predicted, was going to be Islam pitting against the world. And number 3 World War III will pit Islam against the entire world. And look where we are at today.
What's fascinating, if you look up Karl Marx and communism, that was done in 1848. But here in 1871, he's making 3 world war predictions. So that makes me wonder what he had to do with Karl Marx and communism. What was the major plan afoot back then? that he would write this letter to an Italian revolutionary. And basically what he said was the First World War would be the atheist fighting against Christianity. Now, if you look at the First World War and the way it started, I'm not sure if it was the Christians against the atheist. So I'm not sure if that was a proper prediction, although it was a world war. Then World War II, the Second World War, Brett, was to create a new world order. And if you look at what happened after the Second World War, you saw the creation of the United Nations. You saw all of these different entities being born that are socialist based. And I think he hit that one on the head. I pretty much believe that he called World War II. Now, World War III hasn't happened yet, and what we're seeing right now is a possibility of World War III, which is the world will be pitted against the Islamic nations, okay? And if you look how many billions of people are in Islam, and you understand that they all speak one language, they all write one language, that's a very dangerous foe. And then the radical factions there are pitted against Christianity and Western civilization. And what people need to understand is that all you need is a radicalization of about 25% of a group for it to become very dangerous. For example, Palestine, when just a few Palestinians took refuge in Lebanon, I think it was 350-ish Palestinians went to Lebanon. They were actually kicked out because those radicalized Palestinians tried to take over the government, and it's well established. And so they were kicked out of there because they were like, no, we don't want this to happen. We don't want it to be radicalized the way it was. If you look at Finland, just 10% of the population that was allowed to go into Finland became radicalized, and then they had all kinds of terrorist acts, and they're having major problems. The only one that's not having problems is Poland, because they decided not to let these radical Islamic nations go in there. But that leads me to my next point, Brett. And here's the next point. Not speaking against or for Israel versus Gaza, Gaza versus Israel and Palestine, the whole bit. I'm just pointing out a couple facts. There's a couple projects afoot right now that are being supported by the United States and have been for years. In the 1960s, it was proposed by the United States to Israel to drop about 550 nuclear weapons through the desert to create a causeway that would give the Suez Canal a run for its money. So the idea is they would go up to the Amen corridor and dig out with nuclear bombs and make another easy a waterway.
So they were going to cut this waterway out with nuclear bombs?
Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
But as you would guess, Israel said no and hell no, right? So that just got put on hold until there was major problems with the Suez Canal. I don't know if you remember, but there was a freighter that was stuck there, and for weeks it couldn't get moved, and that really held up the economy. So the new talks were afoot to do another canal, which makes sense, and Israel would profit. The only problem is it comes out of northern Gaza. That's a huge problem, because who lives in northern Gaza? The Palestinians. So the question is, it goes through Israel, then goes through Palestine to make this causeway. And where are the Israelis right now? Northern.
So you're saying it has to go through Israel before it goes to Gaza.
Well, no, it does go through Israel, and then it stops. It goes through
Okay,
Palestine.
so it stops in Palestine, but ultimately it's controlled by Israel.
Well, yeah, that would be because they're going to put all the money in the whole bit. But then
That could be a problem.
Yeah, then the question will lie later is, well, yeah, you could do that, but you're going through our designated land, which is northern Gaza, which is Palestinian quote unquote land right now. So then you've got another problem. Do you know that some of the biggest gas and oil reserves were found off the coast of Gaza that would rival what the other nations that are around them have? So there's been 2 separate platforms built to pull out this oil and this natural gas that's coming out of there. They're making billions of dollars. However, now with this Suez Canal rival being built, that whole area right off the coast of northern Gaza is going to be now more attractive because there's trillions of dollars of natural oil and gas, and Europe is dying right now to get that to them so that they can continue their way of life. So Israel now is becoming a player with oil and gas. And what parties do you think would be against that? And I could tell you, the Arab nations around them, because they don't want them to get the money and get the power that comes with it, but also Russia, because that puts Russia in a bad situation. And the reason it's a bad situation is because their main export is gas and oil. So it's going to pit the world against Israel. And all they need is a simple excuse to light the fire. And we could be thrust into a world war. I don't think it's wrong for Israel to prosper. I don't. However, for us to go into a full-out war over their prosperity is up for debate. And we're not doing that in this show. I'm just saying, it is kind of freaky-dicky.
Basically, look what we did with Vietnam. That was our reason for going into Vietnam, which was communism is starting to spread. And instead of letting communism spread, we're not dealing with it here in America, but we don't want communism to spread around the world. So what do? We're going to go into Vietnam. We're going to cut the head off the snake before it even starts. So that's our interest in helping Israel right now, which is all the surrounding countries. And I'm a firm believer that they want to take out Israel. They don't want the Israel state to exist anywhere in the Middle East at all. Whether they publicly say it or don't publicly say it. So to me, the United States' vested interest is if we allow it to get put out, if we allow capitalism and the Western civilization to be stomped out right now in Israel, we know that's just going to create a huger and a bigger problem down the road. But that's what we do, isn't it? We get ourselves involved into foreign lands, into foreign problems, with the fear of if we don't do something about it now, or if we just let it run rampant, then it's going to come back and get us in the end in some shape or form.
Yep.
Right? So what's the best way to not allow the people to rise above? Is to never allow the people to have rights to begin with, in a sense, right? So to keep things suppressed, if you never allow them to get a breath of fresh air, it's going to be a lot easier to keep them suppressed than to start giving them a fresh breath air, because you give somebody an inch, they'll take a mile. You give them a mile, they'll take, I don't know what's after that. So Frano Slack, the luckiest man alive, or as the media dubs him, Frano Slack, the man who can't be killed. So he's a Croatian man who is also considered, so he's a Croatian man who has cheated death 7 times. So his first encounter with death came in 1962 when he was riding a train that derailed and fell into a river. He managed to swim to safety, but 17 other passengers in the plane died. The very next year, he was on a plane that crashed into a mountain, and he was thrown from the wreckage and survived with only minor injuries. Then in 1966, he was hit by a bus while walking down the street. He was knocked unconscious, but suffered no major injuries. And then 4 years later, he was working as a mechanic when a car fell off the jacks and crushed his legs. He was rushed to the hospital, underwent surgery, and again was completely fine. And then in 1973, he was driving his car when it caught fire. He managed to escape. So then again in 1973, he was driving his car, crash, and it caught fire. Again, walks away completely fine. Then in 1995, he was on a bus that was hijacked. The hijackers held the passengers hostages for several hours. Again, released completely unharmed. And then finally in 2006, he was walking down the street and a tile fell from a roof of a building and struck him in the head. Put into the hospital, knocked unconscious, put into the hospital, again, completely fine. Sam Bankman-Fried, guilty, guilty, guilty. The trial came back, and the jury found him guilty in 2 hours. 2 hours. He was found guilty on 7 charges, 2 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of securities fraud, 1 count of commodities fraud, and 1 count of money laundering. AKA, the judge has yet to give him a sentence, but it can be up to 100 years. And I really think they're going to pull a Ross Ulrich, a Silk Road on him, and they're going to give him the book and beyond and everything else they can think of to make a case, to make an example of him. That's what I think he's going to do. I think he's spent the rest of his life in prison. But here's the interesting little tidbit about that, Pedro, is basically when he was on probation and was on an ankle monitor, yes, he was at his parents' house the whole time, but he wasn't allowed any internet access. Reportedly, he completely freaked out to the point where after talking to him, they basically said that Sam Bankman-Fried would rather be in prison the rest of his life as long as he has internet access than to be free and not have internet access. So he would rather be in prison and have internet access than live in a world where he doesn't have access to the internet at all. Think about that, man. That's crazy.
That is like telling for that generation, right? And that is unbelievable. So it's telling that someone like SBF is going to jail. He had the largest crypto exchange in the U.S., and he chose the dark side. I will say that I believe they're going to try to throw the book at him in sentencing. For some reason, I keep thinking about A Great Escape. I don't know a guy that is more politically connected than SBF. And based on me putting this puzzle together, or where the hell he came up with the money to be able to trade in Japan and make a name for himself, I have a suspicion that he won't be in jail long. Whether he's killed or smuggled out or something. I don't think he's going to serve the time that they're claiming he's going to have. He did just too much for too many of power to remain in jail, to cut a plea bargain or do something. I think he knows too much. And so you either what? You silence him, doing Epstein, or you get him out.
I think it's easier just to give him an Epstein treatment. honestly. I mean, that kills two birds with one stone. You know, why go to the trouble of having to connect, using all of his connections, and now there's a connection between him and the people that help him out? And why risk why risk political suicide? Why risk your reputation, your money, and everything else to help somebody out that the world's condemned anyways? So to me, the easiest and best solution is to give him the Epstein treatment.
I think Sam Bankman-Fried knows too much. I think he's a liability, but he's not stupid. I think he planned. There's a lot of money missing, a lot of coins missing. There's a lot of stuff going on. He has more than we purport that he has. So he may have enough money to hire guys to get him out and change his identity. He may be a big problem for politicians, for some elitist, so they may want him out. He is very politically connected. So what's going to happen is anyone's guess. But I don't see him lasting in jail very long. In one way or another, something's going to happen to that boy. I feel sorry for him. He was a puppet. He was used. He did silly things. I don't see him lasting too long in jail. So that wraps up our podcast unless you got something else you want to talk about. So thanks for joining us here at Urban Legend Crypto. Have a good one.